Right. Hello. As you all know, childcare is a foundational pillar of our economy. Many childcare programs are still open currently to provide childcare for essential and emergency workers. However, once the recovery period of COVID-19 kicks in and families need to start returning to work, it's going to be absolutely critical for childcare providers like you to be able to mobilize quickly. We know businesses across many sectors, including childcare, are being impacted by COVID-19. So we wanted to make sure we get this information out to you as soon as possible on financial support programs that are available for businesses. My name is Jordana with the Early Childhood Action Strategy, and I'm here with Richard Rand to talk story about those financial supports. Richard is a partner with Marr Jones and Wang, specializing in labor and employment law. This year will be his 40th year of practice after graduating from the University of Pennsylvania and then Georgetown Law School. Congratulations, Richard, for those
Thank
40
you.
years.
I shouldn't have disclosed that. It makes me feel a little older than I want to be.
It's all good. So mahalo again, Richard, for joining us today and talking story about some of these really important programs. So in the previous weeks, I think many people know that through the CARES Act, funding was released to aid nonprofits and small businesses during COVID-19. So the CARES Act 2.0 is actually up for debate today on Thursday, which will appropriate more funding for these programs. So we wanted to make sure that we go through these questions with you folks so that you can apply as soon as possible and get a lot of information that you might need if you are considering it. So with that being said, Richard, why should childcare providers consider applying for these programs?
Okay. Well, the CARES Act created this PPP, Paycheck Protection Program, which is the only program right now that actually results in forgiveness. So although we call them loans, the idea is they really turn into grants. And if you are able to have the correct formula and satisfy the requirements, this money, which is 2.5 times your average payroll over 2019, for example, will be forgiven. So it's not a loan, it's a grant, and it's money you can use, and you will not, it's not income under federal law. There's a question yet under state law, which we'll have to resolve. But it's essentially the government giving you money primarily to keep your employees paid. You have to use 75% of it at least for that. And it's the only program of its kind. I don't know that there's going to be another bucket of money into the PPP. I think they're going to look at other things, but this is kind of unique. It's a Band-Aid, but it's a really good program if you can do it. And we did it. We should be getting our money very soon, I hope.
Perfect. And Congress had passed, the CARES Act a few weeks ago, and the PPP program, the money was expended in a matter of weeks. So if there are additional dollars, when do you anticipate that might run out?
Very quickly. In fact, there's probably already people in line that didn't get in the first tranche. So if you have an application on file and you got shut out because there was no money, that you should stand in line. If you don't have an application, you should file it yesterday. I mean, this is a good program. The application form is very simple. There's no collateral required. There's no personal guarantees. It's really the best program they've created yet. I mean, there's other SBA loans, but they're more onerous and more traditional. The idea here is that you're going to get this money and you're never going to pay it back.
Okay, great. So I reached out to a few childcare providers specifically to see if they had any questions about any of these programs. And the biggest one I was getting was the concept around the forgivable piece of the loan, right, which you've talked a little bit about. So what exactly does that mean? What is forgivable, and are there things that are not forgivable?
Okay. The basic concept, and let me preface this by saying we don't have any guidance yet on forgiveness. We have Q&As, but they haven't touched on this. So the basic concept is you get a loan that is 2.5 times your average monthly payroll. You have to use at least 75% of that for payroll. You can use up to 25% for rent, mortgage, utilities, pre-existing debt. Your forgiveness is determined by comparing the number of FTEs you have in what we call the recovery period, which is literally 8 weeks from the day you get the money, to either the first 2 months of this year or a few months of last year. So if you have 10 FTEs during the 8 weeks and you had 10 FTEs in the first 2 months of this year, 100% of your loan is going to get forgiven. assuming you haven't reduced pay. That's the basic concept. So it's a sliding scale. So if you have 90%, then 90% will be forgiven. But the key to forgiveness is to compare your FTEs, which is full-time equivalent count, during the covered period to either the first 2 months of this year or there's roughly a 4-month period of last year. And if you're able to meet those numbers, if it's 100%, your entire loan is going to be forgiven. And we are assuming that FTE is 30 hours a week. That's the traditional SBA definition of FTE. So you might have all your employees working 20 hours a week. You add up all those hours, divide it by 30. That's going to get you your FTEs.
Okay, great. So so one question that was asked was, how would you calculate FTEs? So many providers have part-time staff, they have on-call staff even, so you would just take all of those hours and divide it by 30.
Right, that's what we're assuming as of now. We've been waiting for regulations on forgiveness for a long time. They haven't come out yet. And another thing is on these loans, your first payment is deferred for 6 months anyway. So if you got a loan today, you wouldn't be making a payment till October at the earliest. So you're going to have plenty of time to apply for forgiveness. But I think it's pretty safe to assume 30 hours, take all your hours, divide by 30, that's your FTE count. And you want to be as close to 100% of that in the 8 weeks you have the loan to you were prior to the loan.
Okay, perfect. And for parts that might not be forgivable, what's the interest rate?
I think it's 1% right now. I thought it was 0.5, but I think it's 1%. It's a really low interest loan. It's only a 2-year term though, but it's a very low interest loan. So it's really, you probably can't borrow money below 1% right now.
Okay, perfect. You did mention the time periods that businesses can use to calculate. Are there any specific dates on that, or how would they?
Yeah, there are. So there's 2 periods, what I call the pre-COVID periods. And I'm going to pull them up. One is the first 2 months of this year. So that's January through the end of, January 1 through February 28th. And then the other is the first, I've got to find my little PowerPoint. Actually, you know what? It's February 15th through June 30th of last year. Okay, and I'll get you exact dates in a minute. But those are roughly the 2 periods. So it's either the first 2 months of 2020 or roughly 4 months in 2019, and they just pick those dates. So obviously you want to pick the comparison period that has the lower FTE count. Unless your count hasn't changed, then you don't worry about it. But you would look at those 2 and go, okay, which one is my lower count? Because that makes it easier for me to hit the 100%.
Okay, that's super helpful. So of the 2 periods, providers should be picking the one that has a lower FTE to make it easier for the pieces to be forgivable.
Yes, yeah. I mean, that's probably what you want to do. Yeah, and so again, but if you're somebody whose your FTE count hasn't changed, then it won't matter. But I think they gave you those 2 options because they realized some businesses were a little flatter. Now, there's also a seasonal. Okay, if we want to talk about seasonal, I don't know how many of you are. There's a special exception for seasonal employers. And let's find that one. So, okay, why don't we, let's see. I'm gonna look here real fast. And I don't know how many of you are considered seasonal, probably not. Okay, so, sorry, PowerPoint isn't as quick as I'd like. So if you're seasonal, then you look at the 12-week period beginning February 15th, 2019, or at your election, March 1st, 2019, and ending June 30th, 2019. So that's a special rule for seasonal employers. Otherwise, it's those 2 other periods I talked about. And the seasonal one you would use if it's helpful to you. Otherwise, you would use either the first 2 months of this year or roughly February 15th through June 30th of last year.
Okay.
So those are what I call the pre-COVID periods. And that's the comparison period for, let's see. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, those are the rough. And again, there's the problem with the CARES Act is there's so many different dates they use. The covered period is literally 8 weeks from when you get the loan. The pre-COVID periods are those two other periods, and then there's a special rule for seasonal employers. Your payroll is actually, most people are just using the average of 2019. That's just easier. You're allowed to do that. Although literally you're supposed to use 12 months before you get the loan. So all sorts of different dates. You almost have to put it out on a chart to understand it. But the basic rule for forgiveness is, okay, once I get my loan for those 8 weeks, how many FTEs do I have? I'm gonna have to compare that to one of possibly 3 periods if I'm seasonal, and make that determination. What I've been telling people is get the loan first and worry about the forgiveness second. It's a good loan to have. And even if you get 80 or 90% of it forgiven, that's the best loan you're ever gonna get.
Right, that's a good point. So I think as we've been talking, and I'm sure as people are feeling, especially childcare providers who might have already been considering this or putting in applications, as I've heard some have, this is a lot of information. So what kind of help is there for those that are applying or wanting to apply?
Well, if you go, the loan application itself is very simple. You're going to go through your bank probably, and most Hawaii institutions are participating, and the bigger banks have made a number of these loans now, so they know. And there's Q&As. They're not very helpful. They're more technical, but you have to sort of remember the basic rules. Somebody in your organization or your accountant's going to have to calculate your payroll. That's the first step. What's 2.5 times my average payroll? They're going to want 941s. They're going to want some documentation of what your payroll costs are. And so be prepared to get those. The SBA itself is not really, they're the funder. The banks are the lenders. So the banks actually are pretty good about walking you through the process. They may require signatures. No personal guarantees, no collateral, which is again, another big distinction. If you go in for an SBA 7 loan, which is a traditional loan, you have to put up collateral after a certain amount, and you may have guarantees. So you just have to make sure you have all your forms ready, your documentation of what is your payroll. There's a drop-down box apparently for your FTE count, so you should know that. So if I hadn't applied for a loan as of today, first thing I'm going to do is calculate my average monthly payroll, get my 941s, figure out my FTE count, and go in there and do it. I think the banks are probably more helpful right now than the SBA. The SBA is, they're the money.
Got it. Makes sense. And who's actually eligible? So let's say you do have other loans or even another SBA loan, would you still be able to apply for the Paycheck Protection Program?
Yes. Now, the only integration is with your PPP and your Economic Injury Disaster Loan, EIDL. But the EIDL has a large cap. So between the two of them, you can only get $10 million. I don't think anybody here has to worry about that. The nice thing about a PPP loan is you don't have to show, there's a certification, and they just came out with an amended Q&A today, because you've probably heard about people like Ruth Chris's, no offense, I like Ruth Chris, they have good food. They were getting loans, and what the SBA said yesterday or today is, listen, if you're a big publicly traded company and you have other sources of capital, you're probably not the person you want to make the loan to. So you have to certify it's necessary to continue operations due to economic uncertainty. That's about it. You do not have to show that you cannot get funding elsewhere. For everyone in our group, I wouldn't worry about it. It's a very simple certification, economic uncertainty. Considering the orders that our mayors and governors have issued, it's not a very big threshold. If you were a big publicly traded company, yeah, you'd have to worry about it. So you do integrate it with the EIDL, but you can get it in addition to any other SBA loan you have. You can only ask for one loan. There is a thing, if you have a criminal conviction, sorry, they may disqualify you. That's about it. But when you see the actual loan application, it's a pretty simple. It's like a page and a half. It's very simple.
Perfect. And many childcare providers, well, all of them have to go through background checks. So I don't think that would be a problem.
Yes, I'm sure. Okay, and as the pre-COVID period, as I said, I think I've got it memorized, February 15th to June 30th, 2019, or the first 2 months of this year. That's for determining your FTE count that they're going to compare to your FTE count during your 8 weeks. There's also this safe harbor, we call it. If you have laid people off between February 15th and April 26th, another weird measurement period, you have until June 30th to recall them, and you can count them in your FTE count. So that's another little quirk. And again, that's February 15th to April 26th. Don't ask me to explain the oddity of that. So if you reduce your workforce and then you have until June 30th to bring them back, and they'll be counted toward in your 8 weeks. Now, if you get a loan today, you're going to be done right before June 30th. If you apply today, your loan will probably end after June 30th. So that's an ability for you to bring people back. And the question we always get, so what does that mean? We have to bring them back, they have to work? We don't know yet. We're flying a little blind here, and we'll know, hopefully by June 30th. So that's another little hook for you to try to get us maximize your forgiveness.
Okay, perfect, thank you. So you also mentioned like the SBA's economic injury disaster loans. What are some other types of financial support programs out there?
Well, the SBA has, they've got a number of programs. Their traditional Section 7 is a small business loan program. I was looking at that this morning, but that's a very traditional loan. There's a pretty stringent application. There's collateral. There's a bunch of things you have to go through. And I think right now, I tell people the only two you should be looking at is PPP and EIDL, which is Economic Injury Disaster Loan. The EIDL is a loan. It's not a grant. You have to show, economic injury. There's provisions for an advance if you apply for the loan, even if you're not given the loan. And you can do both at the same time. But remember, the EIDL is not going to be forgiven. It's a traditional loan, and I forget what the interest rate is right now. But for most employers and even child care providers, I suspect most of your cost is your employee cost, and so that's what the PPP was designed for, to enable you to keep your employees on the payroll.
Okay, perfect. So I know there is a difference between the EIDL and the advance, and I know you mentioned that you could apply for both. Would you be able to apply for just the advance, or would you also have to apply for the loan in order to apply for the advance?
No, you have to apply for the loan to get the advance. But the weird thing about the advance is you get the advance even if your loan is declined. So I assume you have to repay it. But even if they decline your loan, you're still able to get the advance. And the trick about the advance is it's supposed to be really quick, like almost immediate. So let's see, what did they talk about? EI, $10,000. So, and again, that also ran out, by the way, that funding ran out. So hopefully as we're doing this, the House is voting to replenish it. But an EIDL loan, essentially, you've got to be small business less than 500, which is everybody here. The advance will be payable within days of you making the application. So if you need immediate cash, that's where you want to go. I can tell you from having our firm going through the PPP, we applied, I think, the day the loan's open, and we are getting our money today. So that's what, 3 weeks, 2.5 weeks. It wasn't lickety split. I've heard of other people getting it faster. But the PPP I would count on at least 2 weeks, maybe 2.5 weeks from application to funding.
Okay, perfect. So I'm sure, as you know, in the childcare field, there's a pretty diverse range of providers, right? So we have center-based providers, many of whom are nonprofit, some who are for-profit, and we also have home-based childcare providers. Many of our home-based providers are sole proprietors and usually have 1, maybe 2 or 3 employees. So what kind of recommendations do you have for them, knowing that they might not have a lot of people on payroll?
Well, the PPP actually can be used by sole providers too. I mean, that's another unique thing about it. And the problem was there was a lag between traditional employers and sole proprietorships and self-employed being able to apply. They couldn't apply for a week afterwards. So I imagine most of them were shut out of the first round. So this is your chance. You can get a PPP loan. I think that's the best loan for you. But again, look at your numbers because you cannot use it. You can use up to 25% for what they call non-payroll things. But I would think the PPP is probably your best bet because even if it isn't forgiven, you still have to use 75% for payroll costs, and that can include yourself. And remember, payroll costs includes things like medical. So when you calculate 2.5 months of payroll, include medical costs, you can include state taxes, which is really state unemployment, unless you're a contributory employer. So that to me is your best loan to get. You don't have to show that you can't get money elsewhere, which is a hallmark of some of the other SBA loans. You have to show you can't get credit elsewhere.
Okay. What about unemployment insurance? Are those options as well?
Yeah, I looked at the CARES Act as sort of two sides of the coin. The one side was the enhanced unemployment, and then the other side was PPP. And they're mutually exclusive because if you're getting paid by your employer, you should not be collecting unemployment. So some companies have decided, I don't want to get the loan because I don't have anybody on the staff and I'm not going to. So they get unemployment, and I'm sure everyone's read about the difficulties, I'll say, the state has had in getting checks to people. So right now, apparently they are paying the extra $600, which is coming from the federal government. And the extra $600 is a flat amount. So if you get $100 a week in unemployment, you get $700 a week. In Hawaii, the maximum benefit is $642. And you hit that at roughly $52,000 a year. So if you max out in Hawaii, you're going to get $1,200 a week through the end of July. Then it'll drop back down. The unemployment is normally 26 weeks. That is extended now to 39. But the additional 600 runs out in July. Question whether they'll extend that, too early to tell. And I've also heard some employers say to me, that creates a disincentive for people to work because $1,200 and, they're not requiring anyone to look for work right now because we have the highest unemployment rate in the nation. We went from the lowest to the highest. So that is a problem, but they don't get medical, they don't get the other benefits. So you could make a decision that, this PPP is not going to work for me because I really can't have them on my payroll. So I'm just going to have them collect unemployment. There is also something they did for, if you are a nonprofit and you are what we call a reimbursable employer. In other words, you pay your claims as you go. Half of those are going to be forgiven or actually reimbursed. So I know I talked about that before. Yeah, so nonprofits that have chosen to be reimbursable employers, and those of you watching that know exactly who you are. In other words, you pay your claims as they're made. You don't contribute to the trust fund. You'll be reimbursed for 1/2 of the amounts that you have to pay between March 13th of this year and December 31. So if you get a bill for $5,000 in unemployment, you'll be reimbursed $2,500 of that. And you might decide that's better for you than going through the PPP. Again, what I would emphasize for you, if you're thinking about the PPP today, yesterday, as soon as you see this, get with your banks, because the second funding is slightly less than the first funding, and the first funding ran out like in a week and a half. So.
Thank you again for that emphasis. So many childcare providers have already begun laying off staff just because, you know, if they're not currently providing care for kids, they might not have things to do unless they're doing distance learning opportunities and whatnot. So for those that may have laid off staff or are considering it, is unemployment insurance something that they should be linking their employees to? And if so, where could they go for information?
Yeah, the state has a website. Well, they probably have a number of websites. I don't know which one has not crashed recently. But if you are laying off employees and you're not going to get the PPP loan, which would basically, you would bring them back so you could pay them, then you want to encourage your employees to get unemployment. And so they have to go through the state. I hope they fixed it. I guess the governor said yesterday, they have old equipment. Okay, fine, but you need to get this money out there. Unemployment is taxable to them, so it's not like it's free, but right now it may be the best thing, especially with the extra $600 to the end of July. So if you have somebody who would say only get like $300 a week in unemployment, they're going to get $900 a week in unemployment, at least to the end of July.
Okay, perfect. And as far as, so you did mention unemployment is taxable. Are the loans, like if you were to get the PPP or the EIDLs, are those taxable and you'd have to report on income as well?
Okay, well, so the EIDL is a traditional loan. Normally a loan is not taxable to you because you don't get taxed. It's a wash, right? You repay it, you don't get to deduct it except maybe the interest. The PPP is specifically not taxable on the federal level. Somebody raised the question the other day about our state taxes, because normally a forgiveness of debt is taxable. And disclaimer, I'm not a tax lawyer, I'm not an accountant, but traditionally, someone forgives a debt, it is taxable. And I don't know, and we don't know yet whether our state tax law has this automatic compliance with federal law. If it does, we're fine. If not, they're going to have to fix it. I'm sure the state doesn't want employers getting taxed on the PPP forgiveness. But I would say that your PPP forgiveness will not be taxable, which is why it's really the best thing. Money from the government, forgiven, not taxable to you. That's why everyone was in there applying for it.
Okay, perfect. So if you could give like the #1 piece of advice to providers, what would that be?
Apply today.
Okay.
Apply. If you think a PPP loan is going to work for you, apply today. You also may want to talk to your banker about the EIDL, because that was replenished, but not to the same amount. And that ran out right away too. That's more of a traditional loan, but if the PPP, that's what everyone's trying to get today, not tomorrow, today, sorry, or if you can do it tomorrow. I am not comfortable in saying that there's going to be a third bucket of money into PPP. I think they're going to look at other things. And unfortunately, we were predicting 2 weeks ago that they were going to add money to the PPP, and they didn't, because as you know, Congress tends to fight a little. And you can tell that the sides are already starting to camp out for the next round of stimulus. I saw a very interesting concept about taking your FICA taxes, and instead of you giving them to the government, they would actually give them to you to use to pay your employees. Another thing to remember is the payroll tax deferral in CARES. Okay, that basically allows every employer to defer your FICA, your employer's FICA for any time up until when your loan is forgiven. At first, it was an either or. Either you could get a PPP or you could get the deferral. The IRS, believe it or not, came out with guidance that says up until the date your loan is forgiven, which for most of us is not going to be till September, you can defer. So first quarter payroll taxes, second quarter, you can defer them. Half are due December of 2021, half are due December 2022. That's only a deferral. It's not a forgiveness, it's a deferral. So you're kicking that into next year in 2022, but it definitely helps your cash flow. So that's another thing I would recommend everybody should do that.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you for all of that information, Richard. I will now share my screen so that we can go over just a few important resources. Okay, so here are some resources that childcare providers and nonprofits can connect to. So a really big important one, if you haven't already, is HANO, the Hawaii Alliance of Nonprofit Organizations. They are offering free technical assistance to folks who are even just thinking about applying. So please go ahead and visit their website and give them a call. It's a really easy website to plug in, hano-hawaii.org. And if you want this page specifically with more information on the assistance for nonprofits applying for these loans, it's just /technical-assistance.
Great.
As we've talked about extensively, reaching out to your local banks who are lenders. The SBA actually does have a list of all the local lenders here in Hawaii on their website if you want to access that. Most major banks are doing this, so call your bank. There are some banks that are doing it even if you're not part of the bank, so there's plenty of options that you can call for that.
Yeah, and one thing on that, in the new funding, they reserve certain amounts for institutions that have certain limits of capitalization. So the list may actually expand. You may find people on there or institutions that weren't on there the first time. And as Jordana mentioned, unfortunately, most of the banks were only giving loans to existing customers. Hopefully that will change, but there may be some new funding sources out there based on the new funding.
Of course, the Small Business Administration's website has a lot of really good information on the economic injury disaster loans and other more traditional loans that they might have. They also have some good resource guides and Q&As as well. So here's what the website looks like. And if you want specifically coronavirus relief options, definitely click on that photo. One thing to note that I did hear from some providers is, be sure to click on the coronavirus relief options part. Otherwise, you might go to a more traditional loan and be applying for something different from what options they have on COVID-19. And then, of course, Patch, our state-designated childcare resource and referral agency, is here to help childcare providers across the board on additional resources. They too actually went through a training with Richard, some of the staff at Patch, so they should be able to help Kokua providers at least to direct people on where to go and answer some of their questions. So again, patchhawaii.org, or many of you childcare providers are familiar with their number, so feel free to connect with them as well. And of course, you are welcome to connect with us, with Richard, or with myself. I have our email addresses listed here, so feel free to shoot us an email at any time. Richard, do you have any last thoughts or last?
Apply, because you don't have to, because the application process takes a while. You could apply and then decide, what, this isn't the right loan for me, and I'm not going to go forward with it. But I would really encourage you to get in line, because this program is unique, and that's why the funding ran out. And I don't know that we're going to see another tranche of funding. We've seen two, they've funded, we're talking, billions of dollars. We used to talk in hundreds of thousands of millions. Huge amounts of money are going into this. And Hawaii, actually, there were stats published. Hawaii did very well on these. Hawaii companies got more than their fair share. They are going to make some big companies give the money back now. That's not you folks. But I would apply. And if you think EIDL is for you, apply, because you might decide, what, I don't want to do it. But if you wait too long, this money's going to run out again. They're going to exhaust it. And unfortunately, I don't know that Congress is going to do it again. People like it. It's a good idea. It's a great idea. But apply. The application form is on the SBA's website. It's a pretty simple form. Just go calculate your monthly average payroll. They have it. It's 2.5 times. That's your number. That's what you're going to ask for. So
right.
Apply.
Perfect. Take Richard's advice and apply today.
Applied yesterday, yes.
All right. Thank you so much, Richard. I want to give you a huge mahalo. And
Thank
in the
you.
background, I'm doing a round of applause for this. I
Okay,
really
virtual
appreciate
applause.
it. Yes, virtual round of applause. So mahalo again. So childcare providers, again, if you have any questions, this is a recorded video. So feel free to look back on the resource pages if you need numbers or whatnot, or need the links. And again, feel free to email Richard or myself. We're happy to help in any way.
Right.
All right. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you. Stay safe.
You too. Take care.
Okay.